Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. I'm Ani Anderson.
And I'm Brian Trzaskos. Join us as we explore the science
and art of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools.
Strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional.
Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence.
If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started.
Hi, and welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. Hey there, Brian.
Hi, Ani.
Hi, how are you today?
I'm doing all right. It's a little bit of a rainy day here today, so I'm feeling the rain.
Ready for a cat nap?
Yeah.
I'm sure our cat is napping on the couch right now.
All the time. He doesn't need rain to nap.
No, but he does take advantage of the rainy day napping.
He does.
Yeah.
Well, he looks like he enjoys it more.
He does.
Maybe on
I think
rainy
we're
days.
projecting that for sure.
Yes.
Lucky cat.
Yeah. Well, here we are today.
Yeah, what are we
and
talking about
so
today?
Grateful that you're here joining us for the podcast.
Episode 90, yeah.
Episode 90, yeah.
Nice.
So this week we are evolving the conversation on coaching for emotional reactivity.
Well, thank goodness. I'm really glad to hear we are evolving that conversation.
To continue on. Yeah, I know this was a one that you really wanted to do, this podcast, yeah?
Yeah, well, I've been doing a lot of talks for the International Coaching Federation on emotional regulation, and I'm actually astounded at how little information there is about emotional regulation, emotional reactivity as a part of the coaching conversation. Anyway, it's just really very little being talked about, which is astounding to me because, I mean, a lot of us, me included, learned in coaching school, coaches don't really do emotions. Okay, coaches do emotions all the time. So let's get educated.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So you know how I roll, Ani. I always need to start off with a definition.
It's got a definition.
I got to put us on the map.
Yeah, I actually can't wait to hear your definition of this. So where'd you get it from?
I looked around again. I looked at through the literature on PubMed. I like to kind of look at the research stuff because you could Google like emotional reactivity. And you're going to get all kinds of things from all kinds of places.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate because I look through them.
Sure.
And then I decide
Let's go to PubMed.
Let's go to PubMed.
Yeah.
So for me, it's like I want to go like what's happening in the research. So this is from a study quite a while ago in like the 1990s, 1980s.
Wow,
so,
that was a long
time ago. But emotional reactivity hasn't changed much since then. So this is the definition. So emotional reactivity has been characterized as the emotional response to an event that may vary between individuals in terms of intensity, the speed at which it reaches peak, and return from its peak back to baseline.
All right. So I didn't tell you this part, but I was really interested to see in that definition of emotional reactivity what was going to happen because we both know that scientists have not agreed on a definition of emotions.
Correct. Yeah, exactly. And it actually says that in this paper as well.
Okay, fantastic. So I like them even more that they acknowledged that because I was like, where is he going with this definition of something that scientists have not agreed on a definition around? So I approve of your definition.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just grabbed it. It's not like I'm not going to defend it or love it. I just like I needed someplace to get us started with, right?
Yeah,
so,
for sure.
So what we're saying with emotional reactivity is obviously from this thing is that's an emotional response. Like something happens, that can differ between people.
Yep.
So something happens in the environment, and then we're having an emotional response to the event, and it's going to vary between people. It's going to vary in terms of the intensity which it happens.
Yeah.
It's going to vary in terms of the speed at which it occurs.
Yep.
And it's going to vary in terms of how our emotions, let's just say, because they didn't say anything here about nervous system. They said emotions return back to baseline again. But this is just the definition. The paper goes into more detail around it, but I just wanted to kind of get us on the map.
Well, I'm thinking about, I appreciate how much variability is in that definition because you and I have a very different experience of emotions. You know?
Yeah, sure.
Every once in a while, I may have said something to you like, why don't you have emotions? And you're like, I have emotions. I just express them differently than you. But the way that you and I experience and express emotions is very varied. So I love how that's a part of this.
Yeah, and I would say based on that and what you said too, a key feature of how you and I navigate through the world differently emotionally is specifically around the reactivity.
Hmm.
So we have very different levels and around of emotional response or
Yes.
reactivity to things that go on.
Yes. So I want you to think for yourself as you're listening about emotional reactivity for you, because for me, things happen very fast and they're very big. And that's what emotional reactivity in general looks like for me. Although it's the impulse, actually, I will have impulses that I don't necessarily blow up or act on,
Hmm.
but there's like impulses how many times a day. So sometimes I can get to the end of the day and I might think to myself, well, there was no emotional reactivity, but there were impulses and stuff. So this is something that's happening for me every day. And I think that's an important part of this conversation because when we talk about emotional reactivity, we could look at the end of our day or week and say, well, I didn't blow up today or I didn't blow up this week. I don't really have any emotional reactivity. And
Yeah.
I would say, let's take a peek at how that shows up for you.
Yeah, what's occurring to me as we're having the conversation at this point, Ani, is that emotional reactivity, when we talk about emotional reactivity, most people are referring to emotional hyperreactivity,
Yeah,
not emotional hyporeactivity. Right?
correct.
Because I'm
Absolutely.
thinking like
Oh,
there can be
yeah,
something
that's a
that
great
comes
point.
up and you tend to go to the hyper side. And sometimes I have to try to get myself to react to it
Yeah.
because I naturally go to the hypo
Opposite.
reactivity side, which makes us like the Tai Chi, right? So like we're basically balancing out. Together
Mhm.
we make one whole nervous system
Living the yin yang
sort of thing.
right here
Living
for
the yin and
you.
yang, exactly.
Yeah.
Living the Tai Chi
Yep.
right in front of everybody.
Yeah.
So hyporeactivity is not any more like, I guess, let's say non-functional than hyperreactivity.
Yeah.
Because any level of reactivity in some ways is useful and meant to be, right?
Yep.
Now the question is it really functional? Is it helping to serve the goals that we want to create in the world or
Correct.
not?
Yeah.
I think when I think about function, that's how I think about it, sort of thing. Because certainly in certain situations, like emotional hyperreactivity could save your life,
Yeah.
where hyporeactivity is going to get you killed,
Yeah.
and vice versa is true in certain situations. Hyporeactivity is going to be keep you safe. Hyper, not so much, right? Even beyond normal.
Yeah.
So if we're just kind of looking at like emotional reactivity in our conversation, and I think the way that in contemporary language, if you look out there on the internet, most people are talking about it in terms of the hyper side.
Correct, for sure. Hmm.
Okay. So what are some, so I kind of screened through some of the research and started looking at, well, how do you know that you're experiencing emotional reactivity, right?
Let's
What does the research say
let's find
about it?
out.
Okay.
We'd
What's
love
it
to
say?
know what they say
Right.
about it.
So they say, it's when you feel that you have no control over what happens or what you say.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's probably in the ballpark,
Yeah.
right? You say hurtful things to people,
Oh,
including yourself in
that
moments of anger.
that might happen to other people, but that's never happened to me.
Never happened to you? Okay. So that actually goes back to the self-judgment thing we did like a couple weeks ago, right?
Hey, I'm sorry, Brian.
Oh, yeah, well, I get it. Good thing I hypo-react to those things. Yeah, exactly.
What else?
All right, what else we got? So your moods change quickly and without warning.
Yeah, no warning. Didn't
Okay.
get the memo.
So emotional reactivity, there you go. You have suffered from a depression or anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You feel rage at the slightest perceived criticism.
Mm-hmm.
Goes back again to that self-judgment piece,
Yeah.
right? Those are two features that
Yeah.
we talked about a couple weeks ago,
Yeah. We talked about that in 2 podcasts ago.
something ago. Yeah.
Three. Yeah.
Whatever it was. And your reactions are disproportionate to what's happening around.
Oh, 100%. Yes. I like that one.
So those are features of like
Emotional reactivity.
emotional reactivity. Just to
Mhm.
kind of again get us all on the same map.
Your
Okay.
reactions are disproportionate. I guess we could extrapolate that to what you were saying about hyper and
Sure. Yeah.
hypo, right? Because sometimes I would look at you and think like, why are you not emoting anything? And you're actually in the hypo response of that.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's out of proportion potentially what's going on.
correct. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
interesting way to look at it.
Okay. So of course I look around too and I say, well, what are
They
other
you should
people
talk
saying
about that.
you should do when you are experiencing emotional reactivity? So
Hmm.
what are some of the things that other people say?
Well,
Well,
I can I tell you something I hear all
yeah.
the time? I hear take a pause and then choose how you want to act.
Yeah.
Take a pause, choose how you want to act.
So it
So
sounds
that's
like
one of the
for
things
you,
I've heard
it's
a lot.
something happened, they're in the emotional reactivity, and then
Take a
they need to
pause.
somehow
Somehow.
take a pause
Yeah.
and then choose differently.
Right.
Okay.
Another one I've heard, before you get into your list, I'm just going to tell you a few that I've
Go ahead.
heard.
Yeah.
Don't get defensive.
Don't get defensive. I'm just going back to that list we had before, right? So you feel rage at the slightest perceived criticism.
And then don't get
Don't get
defensive.
defensive.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
Good luck with that.
Yeah. So
Uh-huh.
once it seems to me like depending on the speed and intensity of the emotional reaction, sometimes it's very difficult to
Well, yeah,
rein things in.
for sure.
Right?
Especially when you're a force of nature like me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another one is just take a deep breath.
Take a deep breath. Yeah, these aren't bad.
They are good
Yeah, they're not
suggestions.
bad
Also,
suggestions.
want to just like punch people when they say it in the moment, perhaps, but like absolutely great ideas.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So some of the ones that people say,
Yeah, okay.
the
What'd you
same
hear?
ones that you're coming up
Okay.
with, like active listening.
Yeah.
So instead of getting emotional reactive,
Active
actively
listening.
listen to the person
Great idea.
that you're going.
Another
Great idea.
fantastic idea.
Don't make assumptions.
Yeah. Fantastic
That's a
idea.
great one. Great.
Reminds me of the
Um,
core agreements right there,
yeah, take a breath,
Oh, yep.
take a break,
Yep. Take a break.
identify the triggers that's causing it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm just like getting a little twitch hearing the triggers thing, but
Right,
yeah,
yeah,
for
exactly.
sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which we'll talk about in a minute too. So the interesting thing that comes up is this for me. When someone is emotionally reactive, and by the way, I think this works for either hyper or hypo.
Okay.
Essentially, the brainstem and the limbic system, which researchers and people who do these things call the
Sure.
emotional brain, basically hijacks the nervous system from the neocortex. So the neocortex, the frontal lobe, does have some capacity to modulate behavior and modulate physiological function, but it's a very small thing.
When it's
And
working.
even under great circumstances, it still has minimal
Yeah.
control to do that.
Yeah.
Now, when your nervous system, when your amygdala is activating that fire alarm, and your hypothalamus, pituitary gland, adrenal gland have that HPA axis firing, and you actually get disconnected from the frontal lobes, it's almost impossible to do consciously directed things like
All those
actively listen,
suggestions.
right? Don't take it personal,
Yeah.
like don't make assumptions. Those are all cognitive capacities.
Right. And your cognition is actually not working so hot.
Correct. Yeah, with emotional reactivity.
Right.
Now,
Right. It's like, I don't know. To me, it's not that they're not great suggestions. It's just so unbelievably challenging to do. It's like you got to be a superhero to be able to, you know,
right,
actually make it
to
work.
turn your. So I like take
Yeah.
a breath. I like take a breath of all the.
That's the one you're going with?
Well, I'm not saying I'm going with it.
Oh, okay.
I'm saying of the ones that have been suggested,
Uh-huh.
I think that's the go-to one
Because that'll actually shift your
because that will
physiological
shift your
functioning.
physiological function. I
Right.
still think there's actually more powerful things that we're going to talk about, but of all the ones we talked about, that's probably the one that I would say to go to
Yeah, but that makes sense.
because that
Again,
has an impact directly into your emotional brain.
again, you're impacting your physiology.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So where do we want to kind of evolve this conversation to? And in our programs, the way we work with people with this idea of emotional reactivity is based around the three steps to changing a pattern. Because emotional reactivity is a pattern, isn't it?
Yes.
Right? So something's happening in the environment that we're reacting to,
Right.
and we react typically pretty predictably.
Correct. Right. I'm just, as you're explaining this, I'm thinking this to myself. So I think the general conversation about what to do with emotional reactivity is, in general, a toothpaste out of the tube kind of
Yes,
situation,
yes,
Brian.
yes, exactly.
The toothpaste has come out of the tube. We got to try to get the toothpaste out of the tube. That's generally the conversation that we're having around emotional activity. As we evolve the conversation around emotional activity, understanding that emotional reactions are patterns, and there's a lot you can do before anything is happening that actually primes the system around what happens next, because that's how our brains and nervous systems work anyway, is on prediction. And so there's so much that we can do while the toothpaste is still in the tube at any given point, by the way, when you're having an emotional reaction or not.
Yep.
Like just in any given aspect of the day, to work these patterns so that we predict differently, and so that part of that prediction process is how our physiology works. So that our physiology works differently, predicts differently when things come up.
Exactly.
So it has very little to do, actually, the evolved conversation with what's happening on the outside, but way more about what is happening on the inside, which is so cool because that's stuff we can do something about and have control over.
Exactly. Exactly. And all that said, oftentimes what we have to help people do is walk backwards, like again,
Yes.
after the toothpaste out of the tube.
Yep.
And so I
You
think
kind of start from the end and work your way back.
work your way back. And we do that in a very mindful, very curious, and very compassionate way.
Yeah.
Too often, I think, Ani, when people are experiencing emotional reactivity, they try to actually curtail the process before fully understanding what the process is.
Yeah.
They actually have not done a really good decode or really good investigation about their own internal emotional reactive process. And they're just trying to short circuit it, but they really don't know what they're short circuiting.
Yeah.
And they don't know why they're trying to short circuit it, and what's actually happening in the system.
Yeah.
Right?
One of the I think worst things you can do as a coach or therapist is just tell people not to react. I have had people tell me that. I've had coaches tell me don't react, and I've also had coaches tell me, well, you're gonna react. So like it's just so, oh my goodness gracious. So what you're saying is working on these patterns and working from where you are and kind of working back. Actually, as a practitioner, if you're going to do this with people, it requires us to have patience and understanding and non-judgment and curiosity, because when we enter into this conversation with some kind of judgment, it just starts the judgment cycle with our clients as well, and then they're in self-judgment and off we go.
Yeah.
It's just so, it can get so messy. So we really have to enter into the conversation with ourselves and with our clients with openness, with curiosity, and with patience.
Yeah. And so there's basically three stages in any like kind of changing a reactive pattern. So when someone has a pattern of reaction, which we're talking about here, and again, we're emotionally reacting to something, the first stage in this is to be able to identify the pattern after the reactivity.
After it happened.
After it happens. Because when we talked about intensity, speed, and then returning to baseline, it's easier to identify what happened when the nervous system returns to baseline, because we have more clarity on what happened in the rearview mirror.
Yeah, and then you can be like a scientist or experimenter to look back and get all kinds of data points around what happened.
Right. And the primary data points that we're looking for are sensations, thoughts, words, and actions, because those are the 4 parts of any pattern. And emotional reactivity is a pattern. It's a pattern. So we want to know what the sensations, thoughts, words, and actions are in retrospect. And actually, we even want to know it's like after the reactivity. So for instance, let me give you an example, because we can look at this 2 ways. Say you and I have an interaction, Ani, and I get emotionally reactive by it. And then hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours later, when I'm kind of settled out a little bit, I can do both two things. Number one, I can say, what's my pattern now, in the moment now, 2, 3, 4, 5 hours after? What are my sensations, thoughts, words, and actions after that emotional reactivity? I can also try the best I can to look in the rearview mirror and say, what were my sensations, thoughts, words, and actions during the event, right? And so you can do both those works like after the event. And that's really important to identify those features of the patterns afterwards. That's step 1. Step 2 is,
Step 2 is kind of backing up
exactly.
now. Right.
But step 2 actually is almost impossible to do well unless you've done that first step.
I agree 100%. You have to do step one because otherwise you're not going to be able to do step two.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to have taken the time to determine like what's the pattern look like right now.
Yeah.
And the reason you do it in the right now is because oftentimes after an emotional reactive event, believe it or not, we can actually set up the circumstances of the emotional reactive event in order to experience a pattern that comes out afterwards.
This happened to me just last, maybe it was yesterday, a few days ago, where I was recognizing that there was some emotional reactivity that I know that I set up the whole thing so that I could enact the pattern that came afterward.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So, right. So that's why it's important to do the present moment pattern after.
Yeah.
Because then you might realize, oh, do I have a need to experience this pattern?
Right.
And if I do, then that's fine.
Right.
But am I going about getting here by creating
An emotional reaction.
emotional
Right.
reaction, distress, problems?
Right. So I'll tell you the example just so it makes sense to the listeners. So I thought I left enough time to get where I was going, was dropping my daughter off, and I thought I had left a half an hour, but I actually left like 10 minutes late and I knew we had to stop and get gas and I didn't bake that time in to the whole experience. So I was going to get her there basically right under the wire of when she needed to be dropped off. So during the trip, I was getting reactive because I'm like, oh my gosh, we're going to be like maybe we're late. What if we're late? And then I recognized that after the whole thing was over, I was beating myself up.
Okay.
So as I was beating myself up and watching that pattern, which is familiar to me, I was like, oh my gosh, I don't leave enough time to get places literally most of the time so that I can enact the beating myself up
Oh,
pattern.
interesting.
Yeah. So again, tracking it backwards, I wouldn't, if I didn't know all of these things to be able to track it, I wouldn't have been able to put the dots together that I don't leave myself enough time to get places so I can beat
Yeah.
myself up.
Yep.
So it
Right.
wasn't even about what was going on in the middle of the whole thing. It was about the after.
Perfect. Right.
Yeah.
It's a perfect example. That's a great example. And so you need to have that because there might be a different way to explore that particular pattern now and not need to create all that drama
middle.
before to
Yeah.
get there, right?
Right.
So so that's step one. And then again, the second part of that is you can, in that hindsight, if you have an idea of how you think your sensations, thoughts, words, or actions were in the moment, then in this step two part is to recognize the pattern during the reaction.
Yep. And this takes a lot of self-compassion because the metaphor I use is it's like watching your house be robbed and you're tied up and you can't do anything about it and you're watching your house being robbed. Like you're watching yourself self-sabotage, say nasty things, do things you don't wish you were doing, and you've got to be able to watch that. That takes some self-compassion to be able to witness it while it's going on.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, it's a big deal. I give like people so much credit for getting to the place where they can do that because it's a challenge.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
And this is why this is an evolved conversation because what we're saying right here is rather than doing things like, again, not bad suggestions, take a break, active listening, don't make assumptions. All those things are geared to actually stop the reaction. That's their job, right? To stop the reaction.
Yep.
What we're evolving this to is to witness the reaction.
Yep. Because when you witness it, you get awareness. What you have awareness of, you can change. And you can actually change and rewire your emotional reactions. Of course you can, because they're patterns.
Exactly.
So the coach for me years ago who was like, you're always going to have a reaction, so just get used to it, didn't understand that emotions are patterns and you can rewire patterns.
Yeah.
You can work with it.
And the way you rewire them is starting at the beginning. So, but the way we have to get back to the beginning is to understand the pattern. So when we're in the reactivity, the evolved kind of idea here is not to try to stop the reactivity. It's to investigate the pattern. It's to understand the pattern. It's to see what exactly is going on with clarity. Because if we understand what's going on with clarity, then we can do something about it before the toothpaste is out of the tube.
Right. So first you do it after, then you do it before, and then you back up again.
Yes, exactly. Right. So yeah, first you do it after, then you do it during. right? You become aware of during. And the third step of this is you become aware of the pattern before it happens.
Right.
Because before any pattern activates, there are flags.
Yeah.
There are flags for any pattern. Sometimes these flags are very subtle, sometimes they're very clear. But that's what we have to do is we have to identify the sensations, thoughts, words, actions, and we could say environmental factors that would activate this pattern to basically create that emotional reactivity.
And this conversation actually aligns with the new science in emotion and how emotions are created. And so we're actually looking at context and all of the different pieces of the puzzle that go together to create an emotion within us.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so in order to do this, we have to become more self-aware, really. We have to become more aware and be able to hold our awareness and our attention at a high enough level where we don't get kind of sucked in to the whole hijacking part of the emotional reactivity. We have to be able to kind of experience the reactivity, but also watch the reactivity.
Hey, if you're a subscriber in our library, so on our website, somaticcoachingacademy.com, we have a public library, and you can opt into that if you're not a member of it already. Once you're a member of it, go into the library, scroll down to the bottom, and we have a PDF actually about how to do what we're talking about
Okay.
right now with becoming aware of that amygdala hijack so that we can have more conscious awareness over how it works and what tools to use at
Great,
what
great, great.
stages along the way of your amygdala hijack, because it's not just an on or off switch kind of thing. It's more on a continuum. So if you're not a member of the library, go get your library card. If you are, go into the library, go to the bottom and check out. It's called Hijacked. The PDF is called Hijacked.
Oh,
You get
perfect.
some
Great.
really good information.
Great resource. I love that.
It's really good.
And there's probably some core centering practices
Yeah, there are.
as a part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the core centering practices are things like take a breath. And here's the thing though. Those practices are great for helping us to regulate our nervous system during and after an emotional reactivity, which is important because if our nervous system is more regulated, then we can stay more in that level of objective witnessing. Now, we're not using core centering necessarily to stop the reactivity. That may come as a beneficial byproduct of this. What we're doing is we're really using that just to be able to stay present. Now, that's one. Also, doing these core centering exercises regularly makes it more likely that we are not going to have as extreme levels of emotional reactivity.
Anyway,
so
yeah.
that we can stay more present and experience them and learn more about them as they come through, right?
Yeah.
And it's also a gateway to deeper change the nervous system pattern. So there's
Yeah.
all kinds of benefits to doing them.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Whew. I love this conversation. It's such an important conversation. I'm so glad that, listeners and members of our community can be having this conversation. It's one that, most of the people who are listening to this and are following along with our bouncing ball, they've already done some kind of work with this stuff. You're not new to this conversation, which is why it's an evolved conversation. And sometimes when people have done a lot of work, they go, I've done so much work on this. Yeah, you have. And good for you. Because you have, now you can have this conversation, this evolved conversation around emotional reactivity. If you hadn't done all that work before, you wouldn't be to the
Yes,
place
exactly.
where you
Yep.
could have this kind of level of conversation. So good for you. It's not that you did that and now something's wrong with you because you didn't quote unquote get it and you're not there yet. That's not it. That now you're ready to have this level of conversation. That's really exciting because we see people change the trajectory of their entire lives, their relationships, their business, whatever it is, because they're able to work on emotional reactivity patterns. And, for me, I would say that the experience of working with these patterns, Brian, to be honest with you, is very close to an experience that I would call enlightenment. Like it's the experience that I've been looking for in my 20s when I started to meditate and I couldn't figure out like how to feel more enlightened. It feels enlightening to be able to rewire patterns like this and approach life from a totally different perspective from the inside out. And it's some work and it's worth it. It's
Yeah.
so worth it.
Yeah, huge, huge. I think in kind of in summary, basically, if I was just going to summarize everything we've kind of talked about with one kind of concept and why it's important to take this evolved kind of somatic approach to coaching things like emotional reactivity is how important it is to first coach the nervous system rather than the story.
Yes.
Right? Because our higher brain centers are going to construct narratives based on what we're experiencing, right? They're really good at that. And at the same time, if we get caught up in coaching the narratives, then we can oftentimes not only go into rabbit holes, but when someone's experiencing emotional reactivity, the narrative gets really skewed, right? And we end up being very polarized in the narrative, and that can be very difficult for people. Now, if we just took a step back and just coach the nervous system, now we're coaching the underpinning process that's driving that polarized narrative. So coach the nervous system first.
And that aligns with Einstein's quote about how you can't solve a problem from the current level of consciousness. So if we don't coach the nervous system first, we're actually trying to solve the problem from the same level of consciousness that created it. So you coach the nervous system is actually that change in level of consciousness so that you can get a different outcome.
Yes, I love it. Fantastic conversation today, Ani. Thanks so much for sharing your personal experiences.
Yeah.
Super valuable for as a reflection for people. I think a lot of people can see and feel themselves in some of the experiences that you shared.
Yeah, I hope so. And hey, if you have your own stories to share, please do let us know. Comment below if there's a place to comment. Send us an email, info@somaticcoachingacademy.com. We want to hear your stories too. Social media, put it under in the comments.
Yeah. And leave us a review on the podcast. We always love hearing what you think there.
Yep, for sure.
Thanks so much, everybody.
We'll see you next week.
Bye. Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself.
Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us.
We'll see you next time.